And I lied. So here's part two. So, uh, with Monument Valley, because, like I said earlier, that is totally esoteric. So there are parts of the game that, or the, just the idea of optical illusions and impossible objects, does something exist if you can't see it? But it also allows the user to stretch what he or she can see and what is possible in the game, as seen earlier on, and you will see the more as you move through the game, or move through the game's video, that there are parts of the game that are really just that. Can you see, or can you think about it differently? And the learning objectives about or within Monument Valley are really within this idea of imagination. So, of course, the idea was, well, how do you test for imagination? So the education part of the 13th principle is for human beings, the comprehension of text and the world is grounded in perceptual simulations that prepare agents for situated action. If you can run any model in your head and you can't see if all you have is verbal dictionary-like information, you can't really understand what you're reading, hearing, or seeing. So within Monument Valley, it's, you're playing with that. There are a lot of things that aren't said, which is different, totally different from most puzzles. Like if you think of crossword puzzles and jigsaw puzzles, there's a lot of scaffolding that goes on. Scaffolding in jigsaw is the picture. It's letting you know that this picture is possible if you get everything together. And in crossword puzzles, it's the verbal, written cues that there is a word here if the cue is right. So early on, Monument Valley attempts to scaffold that in the best way that it can without telling the user that this is what is possible. There's part of there's one level where there's a complete gap between where you want to go and where you are. And it's also one of those stages when you can turn the entire level. So because the level is, the gap is a waterfall, there's no way to it. There's nothing, just immediately looking at it, there's nothing that can get either from this point to, from over here to over here, until you start to rotate the stage. And then there's this one moment where it looks like that the two platforms are connected. That's how you get Ida over, because she's able to walk there, because it looks as though these two platforms are connected. But when you move her when you move her into that point, and then you look at everything, you can see that there's no way that these things are connected. But again, it's the thinking beyond what you see is kind of subversive. It's not. It's tricking you into thinking that there's something there, which is possibly a very good metaphor for even doing a Let's Play for Monument Valley, because maybe there's nothing there, and I think that there's something is. But that comes from, at least I think that comes from the way that, like I'm pulling from Bogo's procedural rhetoric. Really, the classic model, which entails persuasion, to change one's opinion or action. And a lot of that comes from, at least for me, comes from, being always interacting with media in various ways. And with Bogos, the idea of interactivity, I think the idea with interactivity is, in context of procedural rhetoric, is it's useful to consider interactivity in relation to a technique in which preposition in a wow, that's a very difficult word to say. But the idea is that through interact, by always working with these devices, always working with media, I have an opportunity to see things in a different way. But a lot of this pulls from, which I said earlier, just not only the way in which I've interacted with media, but also from Thompson Brown's quote about new culture of learning. Traditional approaches to learning are no longer capable of coping with a constantly changing world. You have to balance between the structure that educational institutions provide and the freedom afforded by the new media's almost unlimited resources without losing a sense of purpose and directions. Simply unleashing students on the internet does not solve the problem any more than lecturing and testing them more does. The challenge is to find a way to marry structure and freedom to create something altogether new. And the kind of media that exists right now, when it comes to games like Ori and the Blind Forest,